This is the new Audi RSQ8, and it is a super SUV. You've heard of the supercar. Well, this is the SUV equivalent. 590 horsepower and a sticker price of just under $140,000. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online car enthusiast auction website. Right now on Cars and Bids, we have this excellent BMW M5 with a 6-speed manual, this Suzuki Cappuccino, which has been imported to the United States, and this 6-wheeler Land Rover Defender adventure vehicle, and many more cool vehicles. Check them out at carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this RSQ8 from Audi Beverly Hills here in the Los Angeles area, one of the Fletcher Jones family of dealerships. Audi Beverly Hills sells the most Audis of any dealership in the entire country. So it's no surprise that they would have the new RSQ8, which has been insanely hard to find, but here it is at Audi Beverly Hills. So let's talk RSQ8. You probably already know the regular Q8. It's Audi's fun, cool midsize SUV compared to the more family-focused Q7. Now, the regular Q8 is enjoyable enough. It has a 335 horsepower turbo V6 and bold, exciting styling. But this takes things to an entirely new level. Specifically, it does 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, thanks to a twin-turbo V8 that makes 590 horsepower. That's the same engine in the Lamborghini Urus, although the Urus has 50 more horsepower. But otherwise, these two vehicles are pretty similar since they both come from the Volkswagen family and they both share the same platform. But there's one big difference, and that's price. This RSQ8 has a sticker price of just under $140,000. That makes it the ultimate Audi SUV and one of the most expensive Audi models, but it's about $100,000 cheaper than the Urus. So, is this just a bargain Urus? Today, I'm going to review the RSQ8 and we're going to find out. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of it and show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the RSQ8 up here, where you have quite a lot of carbon fiber around the grille and on the lower part of the bumper. That is part of the Carbon Optic package, a $4,500 option that gives you all of this carbon in front, plus carbon mirror caps, you can see them, and carbon fiber trim on this little panel in back, and it just carbonizes your RSQ8 to help differentiate it from the Q8 a little bit. But to me, more interesting than the Carbon Optics package is the Black Optics package, which is about $3,000 and includes some black exterior trim, but also it includes 23-inch wheels. That's right, look at these things. They are huge, some of the largest wheels on any vehicle today, and proof that the wheel size wars seem to be never ending. And since we're talking wheels, one other important option to mention on this car: carbon ceramic brakes. They are a $9,000 option. This one has them. You can see the front brakes are absolutely gigantic, and it'll make sure that you don't suffer from any annoying brake fade while you're track racing your RSQ8. But to me, bearing in mind all of that stuff, the coolest thing on the outside of this car is the little dance the headlights do when you unlock the doors. Check this out. You unlock and then they sort of sweep across and do this cool little lighting dance to recognize that they see you approaching. And I just think that's a really cool touch for when you're walking up to your RSQ8. But of course, really the coolest thing in the RSQ8 is right here, the engine. This is a 4-liter twin-turbo V8, and it is the same 4-liter twin-turbo V8 that's in all of the flagship flagship Volkswagen Group luxury performance SUVs, the Porsche Cayenne Turbo, the Bentley Bentayga, and the Lamborghini Urus as well. Now, the Urus gets 640 horsepower from this engine. It's only 590 in the RSQ8. They've made it a little bit lower to differentiate the two, but this is still a huge horsepower figure, especially when you consider that it sends this car from 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, even though it weighs more than 5,200 pounds. Really amazing performance. By the way, two things I really like under here. One is the plastic engine cover. I think they're all kind of stupid, but at least this one has these cool red stripes to let you know this isn't just a regular Audi engine, it's an RS model. I also like all the way forward in the engine, the little fasteners that hold the plastic in place all have the little Audi logo on them, and they are all perfectly straight. This is how you know your engine hasn't yet been messed with. This is how it comes from the factory. And next up, we move on to the interior of the RSQ8. And one of the first things you notice in here is quite a lot of RS logos, so you're always reminded what you're driving. You have one at the base of the steering wheel, RS, and the seats also have an RS logo in them. But my very favorite RS item in here is the button on the steering wheel marked RS Mode. You press it and you can see instantly the gauge cluster changes from its normal, helpful mid-size SUV display to a more aggressive display with your tachometer, your G-forces, and how much power and torque you're using, all right at your eye level in front. Of course, it doesn't just do that. Pressing RS mode also puts the car in a sportier driving mode with better throttle response and steering response, and if you press it a second time, you go into RS2 mode, and that turns off your traction control. So you can do some nice drifts and some nice track driving in your $140,000 luxury midsize SUV if you want to. Also, one other item you notice when you first climb in this car, and something I like, is the fact that there are some real sports car-like touches everywhere. For instance, you have carbon fiber trim on the center console all throughout and at the base of the dashboard, which looks good. And you also have contrasting red stitching basically everywhere. The seats have it, the door panels have more red stitching, and on the steering wheel you have it too. It does give this a very sporty interior feel. But next up, I want to go back to the screens for a second. Now, I have covered the screens and the technology in the RSQ8 in other Audi models I've reviewed, primarily the e-tron and the regular Q8, and I will link those reviews in the description below for a more in-depth look at this car's technology. But I do want to hit some of the high points, including the gauge cluster screen. I already showed you a little bit of this, but I love how configurable it is. You can show various different displays, including a 3D Google map that shows you precisely where you are, oriented in the direction that you're traveling, so you won't get lost, and so you don't have to take your eyes very far off the road as you're driving along to look at the map. That is a really cool touch, and I love seeing it in there. But to me, the bigger screen news in the RSQ8 is the middle screens, and I say screens because there's two of them. You have your typical upper screen on the dashboard, and then you have a second lower screen mounted near the gear shift in the center console. Now, this may be screen overload for some people, but it functions reasonably intuitively. The lower screen is primarily for the climate controls, and it works pretty well. You can see adjusting the temperature is fairly easy. Just tap the screen to increase, or you can slide the display over and then increase in larger amounts, and the rest of it all works like a traditional climate control system in most vehicles. And by the way, speaking of the climate controls, one climate control option you have in this car is adjusting your footwell temperature. It truly amazes me that you can have a completely different climate zone just for your feet if they happen to be cold or wet, but I guess that's the kind of thing you get when you spend 140 grand on a luxury SUV. Now, next up, moving up to the upper screen, this has far more functionality than the lower screen. This is your basic infotainment system, and it operates similar to ones in other vehicles, and it's quite easy to use. No huge surprises here. Again, I've reviewed this system in other Audi models, and I was always left feeling it's intuitive, simple, and relatively responsive. But there are a couple of interesting items worth noting in this particular car. One is that you can go into the RS monitor and get all sorts of real-time performance data. This screen shows like your pitch and roll your angle of operation. You can also see your tire pressures. You can go further and see temperature of various different components in the car, not just the engine. And finally, you can see your maximum attained G-forces, various different high-performance monitors that you can check out in this RS monitor. And next up, one interesting upper and lower screen item is navigation system destination entry. If you want to enter a destination, the lower screen morphs into a writing pad, and then you can write out where you want to go. And unlike a lot of these systems, it doesn't just go letter by letter. You can write out full words, and then the navigation system understands them, and theoretically, it begins directing you there. But to me, the best part of the upper screen is the eco section, because you have some rather unusual options. One is the fuel economy tip, which will actually provide you fuel economy tips as you're driving along. You turn this on and it'll tell you how you can maximize your gas mileage in your 600 horsepower super SUV. Another hilarious item in this eco section, you can actually turn on accelerator pedal feedback, meaning that I guess if you have this on you're flooring the accelerator, it will push back to let you know you're not driving as economically as possible. It's a ridiculous feature to have in this car, but they have it. And finally, one other cool infotainment system quirk. When you go into the vehicle section of the system, you tap the vehicle icon, and not only does it light up, but the headlights light up on the car displayed on the screen. Take a look at that again. You can see the icon lights up and the headlights light up when you tap it, and I just love how that looks. It may be a small thing. 99% of people will never give it a second glance, but I think it's kind of a cool little piece of attention to detail. And next up, another interesting item in here. On the dashboard, you have a giant vent that goes the entire way across. Now, this isn't actually one large vent. Instead, you have your two standard center climate control vents and one over on the right, but they've extended the look of the climate control vent all the way across for continuity so that the climate control vents don't interrupt the look of the interior. The entire middle section on the dashboard is just fake. It doesn't actually give you any climate control air. I'm seeing this more and more in cars. Designers apparently think this makes their interior look nicer, not having different individual climate vents on the dashboard. And one other interesting item in the center, you of course have your cup holders, no surprise there, but in between them, you have a little hole, and that's where you put your key. If you're being proper about it anyway, you place your key in that little perfectly sized cubby as you enjoy your RSQ8 driving experience. And next up, we move on to the back seat of the RSQ8. Now, this is only a two-row vehicle, so there's no third row seat. And one of the results of that is that there's a lot of rear seat room back here. It's really impressive. You have a lot of legroom, really can kind of stretch out, and you have decent headroom, which is a benefit. Headroom is often a problem in these sporty mid-size luxury SUVs like the BMW X6, the Mercedes GLE Coupe, but Audi has found a way to create a nice-looking sporty mid-size SUV and preserve your headroom, which tall people sitting in back will appreciate. Now, some other interesting rear seat items. One is the climate control system back here. You have this little pad between the seats, and you can use it to adjust the temperature, the fan speed, and turn on your heated seats. Each seat has its own climate zone, so you can have different temperatures at once back here. It's a nice feature expected in a luxury SUV at this price point. Next up, another interesting rear seat item is the fact that either rear passenger can control both rear windows. You can see on the door panel there are two rear window switches back here. So if you're sitting on one side, you can roll down the window on the other side, meaning you can forever annoy your sibling. I think if I was using this as a family car, I would probably lock out the windows from the driver's seat so that that game doesn't even get off the ground while you're driving. And finally, one other interesting item is the rear seat armrest. You drop it and it's an armrest, but you can also push this little button and then cup holders appear. They're very small cup holders, and if they didn't hide them inside a little housing, they could be larger. But that is what Audi has chosen to do, have disappearing cup holders that pop out at the push of a button. And next up, we move around back in the RSQ8 and on to the cargo area, which is fairly large, or at least fairly deep, although you can see back here the sloping roof does get in the way a little bit of cargo volume if you want to put huge items back here. Otherwise, you do have pretty good cargo space. And it's worth noting you have these little buttons on the left that will actually lower the rear of the car using the air suspension system in case you have a very heavy item that you're struggling to lift in. You can lower the car a few inches to make it a little bit easier to load whatever you're trying to get into the cargo area. And by the way, since we're around back in the RSQ8, I should mention that the Sport exhaust sounds really, really good. Take a listen. Remember, this is a luxury SUV. And two other items worth noting on the outside of the RSQ8. One is the turn signal in back. It has this cool kind of 3D look combined with this sweeping line across the top, and I think it gives this a very distinctive look. But I actually prefer the turn signal design in front, which has even more of a sweeping orange look, like one of those construction signs. Again, very distinctive, a very cool look. Modern Audis really going all out trying to make themselves look cool with their lighting features. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Audi RSQ8. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, time to drive the RSQ8. And I gotta tell you, this thing is pretty quick. You can tell right away. And it also doesn't feel as large and as heavy as you would think it would given the absolutely massive curb weight at play here. It feels reasonably spry. This also isn't a small vehicle, even apart from the weight, just looking at the dimensions. And yet, this isn't really all that bad. And of course, it's really quick. The acceleration is just fantastic, and you have good power at pretty much every portion of the power band. It doesn't really matter where you are. If you're going 40 or going 50 and you press the throttle, it's instantaneous. There's no turbo lag. This is a great engine. We already knew that from the Urus, from the Cayenne Turbo, all those vehicles, and it's great in this one too. All right, giving it a little gas here. Wow, that was fast. And it gets up to speed so fast. That was really, really impressive. It really does somehow neutralize the massive, massive size of this vehicle. It makes it feel an enormous amount smaller. It's just so quick to accelerate, and it feels relatively quick on its feet too when you're moving the steering wheel, changing direction. But with that said, I don't want to say that it's all about speed with this car. Just driving it around normally, it's a very capable and reasonable, comfortable luxury SUV. And this is one of the cool things about vehicles like this. You can drive it around and have a totally normal luxury car experience, or you can just mash on it and really get going. And you can kind of decide at any given moment which you want to be doing, and the car will immediately prepare itself and deliver. Also, I do really like the exhaust note in the RSQ8. It does sound good on all of these 4-liter turbo V8 cars, but when you're inside here, you don't hear much of anything, the exhaust note or anything else. It really is a really excellent luxury SUV that just so happens to be a performance vehicle. Now, I've driven the Urus, and I will say acceleration seems relatively similar. Both are just instantaneous and crazy, but the Urus does seem like it handles sportier. Not a lot sportier, but certainly a noticeable amount. The Urus feels lighter on its feet and more capable of changing directions more quickly. It definitely feels like it has a little bit more instantaneousness to it. But this is not that different from the Urus. And I wonder if they're making a mistake by putting the exact same engine in them. Audi has done this before, of course, with the R8 and the Huracan, but this time it just doesn't quite feel as distinctive. And I kind of wonder if some people will have some pause about getting the Urus given how much more money it is for what is ultimately largely the same vehicle. Admittedly, the Lambo badge and the styling of that, they're very different. But nonetheless, it's going to be a hard sell for some people, even if they have the money. Overall, I'm really impressed with the RSQ8. It's fast, it's fun, it's exciting, it's quick handling, it's luxurious. There's nothing not to like about this vehicle if you're in the market for one of these. And the Urus, as appealing as it is, I know having a Lamborghini badge is nice, but this gives you 97% of the car for like 65% of the money. Also, it's worth noting that I really did like the Q8 that I drove and reviewed like a year ago. It was a great vehicle. The only downside of the Q8 I felt at the time was it just didn't quite have enough power. 335 horsepower turbo V6 just wasn't quite there. This obviously addresses that complaint, although I do think that there's room in between this and the regular Q8 for maybe something that isn't quite this powerful or expensive, but still kind of makes the Q8 seem a little bit more fun and engaging than the standard model. And so that's the Audi RSQ8. This is a great vehicle if you're into ultra-fast, ultra-expensive, ultra-high-tech luxury SUVs. I truly don't understand how it isn't a bargain Urus. They have a similar look, the same platform, the same engine, similar driving dynamics, except this one has a different badge and it's $100,000 cheaper. Anyway, now it's time to give the RSQ8 a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the RSQ8 is gorgeous, not ultra beautiful, but nice enough, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Handling is great for an SUV, but only just pretty good overall. It gets a 5 out of 10. Fun factor is good, given the size and heft of this vehicle to be able to enjoy it this much. It gets a 6 out of 10. Cool factor is good. This is an RS vehicle, and the latest and greatest one right now. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 32 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The RSQ8 is highly well equipped and it gets an 8 out of 10. Comfort is normal for a vehicle like this and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is high, again fairly normal for a vehicle like this, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality is good and it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, value, and this is a good value compared to the Urus. It's fast and it's fun and it's high-tech and it's luxurious, but it's still a $140,000 SUV that's going to drop in value quickly. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 37 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 69 out of 100, which places the RSQ8 here against other luxury performance SUVs. The RSQ8 ties the Cayenne Turbo, which makes sense as they're very similar vehicles with similar performance. The RSQ8 finishes just behind the Urus by merely a point. The Urus does better in the weekend categories with a higher cool factor and better handling, while the RSQ8 has a slight edge in the daily scores. Overall, this is a very competent luxury performance SUV in an ever-increasing world of luxury performance SUVs.